What's up, everybody? My name is Isaac Huss, and today I'm going to talk to you about how and when to tackle tough topics with your girlfriend. Problems. We've all got them. And if you're in a relationship, chances are you've got twice as many, because, well, there's two of you. In fact, if you want an easy life, or at least a life without difficult conversations, I do not recommend entering into a serious relationship. But we don't get into a serious relationship because we want an easy life or because we want our lives to be easier in any particular way, let's be honest. We get into these relationships because we want our lives to be better. And not just theoretically speaking. We are in fact looking for someone who will make our lives particularly better by the fact that we're in a relationship with them. But that doesn't come by accident. Call me crazy, but I think part of what makes a serious, meaningful relationship good is that our lives will no longer go unexamined. That is, we are going to be critiqued, and that means we need to have some sense of reason behind the decisions that we make. Or at the very least, we're going to have to explain the decisions that we make. Sure, that won't always be pleasant, but as the philosopher himself once said, the unexamined life is not worth living. He may or may not have followed that up by saying, so go get a girlfriend. But he may as well have. We all need someone in our lives who will call us out on our bullcrap. But this goes both ways, of course. A good relationship is a balanced relationship. So you need someone to call you out and call you on to virtue, and you need to do the same to your significant other. So that means we need to call each other on to virtue. We need to call out the friction points. We need to communicate when things aren't going well for each of us so that things can go well long term for both of us. And for the Christian, that means holiness and to eventually get to heaven together. Which of course sounds great in theory. How do we do that in real life? Well, just ask anybody what makes for a good relationship. And more often than not, they'll tell you good communication. And not just easy conversation, mind you, but being able to communicate well on the difficult subjects. Perhaps even especially so. For some couples, this can happen fairly naturally. For others, not so much. But everybody's got to start somewhere. Are you wondering where to start? Maybe you've tried and failed. Maybe you're just in a rut. But wherever you are, it's worth being intentional about how you and your significant other tackle the big subjects. So, with all that said, here is how and when to tackle those difficult topics with your girlfriend. First, destigmatize it. Once upon a time, I had a buddy who bragged about how he and his longtime girlfriend turned fiance had never had a fight in their entire relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, part of me was envious because I had been in a relationship myself where perhaps the entire time we were together we were having, shall we say, impassioned disagreements. But the more I thought about it, the more I was convinced that he was lying. Or perhaps worse yet, he was telling the truth. Why worse? Well, to be honest, I'm not sure a healthy relationship can be maintained without some good old-fashioned fights. Either you have gone out of your way to ensure that the stakes aren't that high, so you don't really have to delve into the difficult subjects or the things that may be bothering you or the other person. Or you've gone out of your way to placate the other person such that you are simply not arguing about the things that you should probably be arguing about. Unfortunately for my buddy, that seeming utopia he was experiencing came to a screeching halt when he stumbled upon a romantic affair that she was having. Now, this is not to say that if only they had some fights together that she wouldn't have cheated. But I am saying that for whatever reason he idealized this situation where they weren't going to have anything they really disagreed about fairly strongly. And I do think that contributed to them not being on the same page. One way to proactively avoid that same disconnect is to start out with the presumption that it's okay to have a strong disagreement, at least every once in a while. In fact, I'm of the opinion that people have fights with their significant other, and that's okay. In fact, that's probably good. So the goal should not be simply to avoid fights, but to learn how to fight well and to come out of them even stronger. And even maybe consider them to be a useful tool to strengthen your relationship and grow together. When you both have a sense that fighting is okay, you won't be worried about them happening, and you won't be unduly avoiding them. This can open up a great opportunity instead, that you're now seeking to tackle issues head on, even before they become problematic. Which leads me to my next point. Number 2, be proactive. I have this professor in college who explained how he and his wife every Saturday would go to get coffee and they would sit down and relax and read the paper or whatever they felt like doing. But they would get comfortable and they would set this time aside where they could share their grievances with each other in a safe, comfortable space. In other words, they would set aside some time, and particularly some time when they were comfortable and that they could look forward to share the things that were bothering them about their relationship with each other. This is not to say that they had to share something that was bothering them, of course. In fact, there were plenty of times they would leave the coffee shop without there having been any grievances aired, so to speak. But the point was that they had created this safe space that they could count on where they could bring up difficult subjects together in somewhat of an ideal environment. Personally, I'm not sure I ever want my significant other to bring up some sort of complaint she has with me. But my least favorite time to hear that is when I'm hungry, or when we just got out of an intense social situation, or when we're exhausted after a long day, or when we're in the middle of something, or you get the point, and I could probably go on. It's in these situations where I'm either not going to be on top of my game, or I'm going to otherwise just want to get through this difficult conversation as quickly and painlessly as possible, and that might mean I'm not quite willing to really wrestle with it and to come up with a real good solution that will last. And that, of course, might mean that we're just kicking the can down the road, or worse, letting a real problem fester and only making it more difficult. Either I'm not going to be on top of my game and we're going to risk getting really mad at each other, or I'm going to be tempted to just get through that conversation as quickly and painlessly as possible and be real tempted to just not take it all that seriously, at least at the time. Now, that might mean that we're just kicking the can down the road to deal with at a later date. It also might mean that a real problem is going to fester and only become worse. And perhaps you've heard the whole don't go to bed angry thing. Well, that might be the worst piece of advice I've ever heard. The only thing that's going to accomplish is that you're not going to sleep all that much. Instead, figure out a time that you can regularly set aside, preferably once a week, where you can have these uncomfortable conversations in the most comfortable way possible. Figure out when you can count on being well-fed, well-rested, and unrushed, and open up that time so that you can have these difficult conversations if need be. I think you'll find that these conversations go over better, are resolved more easily and efficiently, and prevent problems from festering. I think you'll also find that it eases anxiety between the two of you, that you both have a point on the calendar that you can count on with confidence. Number 3, contextualize your disagreements. I'm currently living in a home with 2 other roommates, and it's been quite a while since I've been able to say that. And even though it's a temporary setup while I'm working remotely, it has led us to have some of these conversations about how we can all live together in harmony. One of these inevitable conversations is, of course, how to handle the dishes. We're blessed to have a dishwasher, thanks be to God, so it could be a whole lot worse. But there are those times when somebody's cooking, or somebody's in a hurry, or the dishwasher is full, or the dishwasher is clean but hasn't been emptied yet. And what is a guy to do? I've been told by that same professor I spoke about earlier that there are 2 types of people in the world. Those who need to do the dishes right away. And then those who are happy to just relax for a while. Maybe even get some other business done in the meantime. They'll get around to it. Maybe they even want to go to bed and sleep on it and deal with them in the morning. There is, of course, no right or wrong way to deal with the dishes. It's not a moral issue, if you will. But ideally, both of the parties, or all of the parties in my case, whether it's a romantic relationship or otherwise, would be in agreement on how to handle these things. Ideally, in any relationship, romantic, roommates, or otherwise, each is the same. Either you're all do the dishes right away and you're happy to do that, or you're happy to just let it linger and nobody gets stressed. But what if you do have one of each? What do you do then? Who caves? In order to resolve a disagreement like this, my professor would recommend that you do some work to try to contextualize and understand how strong of a preference each of you has on this issue. For instance, I'm the type I could go either way. I do generally lean towards getting the dishes done right away or at least immediately after dinner. But I also sometimes am just happy to hang out on the couch or get some other stuff done or just get around to it eventually. But I'm mostly good either way. Meanwhile, my roommate is the type, however, that dirty dishes somewhat stress him out. Not so much that he just can't stand that there are dirty dishes, but he works at home and he notices the dishes and for whatever reason, it's an issue for him if there's just dishes sitting out all day. He'll even find himself doing my dishes for me, not because he feels like he has to, but because he would just feel better if they just got done and then he can move on with his life. Clearly, in this case, he has a stronger preference than I do, and maybe even a much stronger preference. In this case, I'm happy to do my dishes right away on a consistent basis, if only just to keep the peace between the house. So whether it's dishes or it's where you go to vacation or how much you see the in-laws, whatever it is, talk about where you are on those specific subjects. Find out where you might disagree, and find out where you disagree, particularly in how strongly you feel about something. And if it's not that big of a deal to you, and it is a big deal to your significant other, well, you might even want to think of it as a loving thing to let her be the one who decides that particular disagreement. You might even think of it as the loving thing to change your way of life in order to better suit your significant other's stronger preference. And finally, use your imagination. Okay, so what if you prefer not to have to talk about serious subjects when they come up? And you would also not just want to sweep them under the rug or pretend that they're not there. Then what? Well, allow me to recommend that you talk about the issues before they become issues. Now, this might take a little bit of, remember, imagination. But does it take all that much imagination to imagine what might potentially become issues in your lives together? Although it doesn't take that much imagination to think about what issues could potentially become big problems in a relationship together. So, pick a couple of those, talk about them, and try to figure out where you stand and where you might disagree, and try to come up with solutions together. And you guessed it, I'm going to go back to that old trusty professor I've talked about before. He and his wife had these sorts of conversations all the time, whether it was during that coffee time on Saturday morning or after the kids went to bed or driving in the car or what have you. One of those theoretical situations they discussed was, what if, heaven forbid, one of their children came to them with the news that they were having a baby outside of wedlock? They discussed it, they figured out where they might agree or where they might disagree, and they came together with a plan should that ever come up in their life. A really tough situation, no way around it. And because of that, there was bound to be some strong opinions on both sides of the equation. So they were talking about it, they figured out where they might agree, where they might disagree, and they came to a solution, or at least a plan on how they would approach that conversation should they ever have one with one of their children. Well, you guessed it. Years later, they did end up having that conversation. One of their sons came to them and said that his girlfriend was pregnant. What do we do? And that could have been a really difficult moment, or at very least more difficult than it was, had they not already discussed this and had they not already had a plan on how to approach that conversation. So they weren't having to look at each other, wondering what each other was thinking, how they should speak, how they should act. Instead, they were unified in being able to embrace their son and their son's girlfriend and express how much they love them and how much they appreciated him and her coming to them with this news. And they were able to approach it together as a couple. They were able to have a beautiful conversation with their son and their son's girlfriend. And they were able to move on together with a very productive conversation and a loving conversation. And they were able to have that conversation, and they were able to be united in that conversation in a way that they simply would not have been able to do had they not had that earlier conversation years before. So again, use your imagination. Come up with a list of questions that you would be curious about asking your significant other. Think about potential big, difficult situations you might find yourselves in as a couple, as a family, down the road, of course. And make a list and just start knocking them out over a coffee or a beverage sometime. You might even ask some more, shall we say, well-seasoned couples in your lives for suggestions on what sort of conversations to have before their difficult conversations. There is one book, though, that I can recommend on this subject. It's called If Questions for the Soul, and it's by Evelyn McFarlane and James Saywell. They have this book that's literally just interesting questions, some of them very practical, some of them very theoretical, but it can be just a fun exercise to go through with particularly someone you like a lot. If you're only casually dating, this can be kind of a fun way to get to know each other and to figure out how each other thinks. If you are a little bit more serious, it can help you discern if this is a person that you can really align with in the future and specifically on the big subjects in life. Then, when you do decide to pursue a future with somebody, exploring these questions together, really before you have to, can really contribute to the both of you growing together and to form a united way of thinking and acting that will really help prepare you for the future, whatever challenges may come, whether it's between the two of you or otherwise. All right, well, that's all I got for you today. What sort of advice do you have for couples that want to start tackling some of these big topics together? What's worked for you? What have you maybe learned the hard way? What advice have you gotten that you might want to share with the rest of us? That's what that comment section below is for. We'd love to hear what you thought about this video, any ideas you have for future videos, and honestly, if you just want to say hi, say hi. If you liked what you heard, please give it a like. If you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you to do so. You can even hit that bell up there to be informed when a new video is ready to go. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.